Hello and welcome to Six Figure Authors, the show that helps you take your writing career to the next level. I'm Lindsay Baroker and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Joe Lallo.
And I'm Andrea Pearson.
And last week or so, I asked in the Facebook group what you guys are struggling with, and I appreciate that lots of you gave answers. So we're going to try to do a few shows kind of based on some of the questions that you had or just the issues that you were struggling with. A few people asked what it takes to go from 4 or 5 figures a year to 7 figures or 6 figures a year. I mean, you can go to 7 too, no problem. We're not going to stop you, but at least 6 figures a year. So we're going to discuss that today, and keep in mind that we can tell you our experiences, how the road has been for us, and suggest, we put together like a kind of a checklist of what maybe some things you may want to be looking into if you are feeling that you're kind of stuck in a rut and you have the potential. You've written enough books and you feel like you should be doing a lot better. So we will jump into that. First, do you guys want to, I don't know, you have any news or points of interest that you would like to share before we get into the topic?
Well, I do, except like my whole rant, Lindsay's like, I know what your problem is. And she solved it in like 2 sentences. But I'm going to go over it anyway, just because I think listeners might appreciate hearing. Okay, so I decided to take a good, hard, long look at my Midnight Chronicles and how it was doing. And these are when the cold, hard facts and cash and all of that stuff comes out into the open and with honesty and all of that. And it's not doing fantastic. Since the first book was released in October, the whole series has only made me like $1,300. I think it's $1,330 now, which I'm like, yay, $30 more. But seriously, like I have in my little notes here, like 5 exclamation points. Like this is the worst the series has done for me in a very long time. And I've spent more on this series than I have on any of my other series, mainly because I did all my other book covers for all my other books. And this one, I did 5 book covers for each book in the series. And I bought the stock images for all 5 of those. And then I ended up hiring one cover designer, firing that cover designer, hiring another cover designer. So I spent like over $2,000 on covers alone just for the first 4 books in the series. And I put a lot of money into the launch, which, other people, $3,000, not including my assistant fees, is not a whole lot to other people. But to me, the person who doesn't do huge launches, that's a lot of money. So I've put about $6,000 into a series that has only brought in $1,300. And my question was like, where did I go wrong? What went wrong with this series? And and Lindsay has a point here. I'm actually going to have you give your point, but not yet. Okay, if that's okay with you.
Carry on. I got to prep myself now. I didn't have notes to say something on this.
Anyway, I was like, she's like, do you want feedback? And I was like, not on air unless you give it to me first. So I have time to compose, to like think my way through and be like, okay, I understand. Anyway, so I followed tropes fairly closely when it came to like the creatures in the story, the magic system, the fact that magic is, in my universe, magic is known in the world on Earth, but this type of magic, like the demons, the darker side of magic is not known. And so I followed those kinds of tropes really closely. I followed the trope of the main guy not having money and needing money and having to do jobs that are less wonderful, whatever. Anyway, so the biggest trope that I didn't hit was a strong female lead. And my question on that was, how important is that for successful urban fantasy? It's important, but now that I heard Lindsay's feedback, I'm like, well, yeah, that's also a very good point. And Lindsay, if you want to go ahead and give that right now, because I'm going to talk about Facebook ads in a bit. So go ahead. Ready, set, go.
Okay, well, thank you. I had popped in because I saw your notes. So I went and looked at it more critically than I otherwise would have. And you've kind of got it in fantasy romance. And there's a lot about love. And he's got to assassinate the woman he loves in the blurb. And there's a guy on the cover. And it's a male lead. And I'm like, but this is fantasy romance. And usually it would be a female character on the cover or a naked guy chest. But like something to know, it's usually a heroine with romance, and it's usually focused on her or on both of them. A lot of the romance blurbs are her problem, their problem, or his problem, and then how they have a problem together and they're going to have to come together. So yeah, that was just it. I thought female readers generally are going to identify more with the female protagonist, especially in romance. So that was just my thing. And I think you may just want to change the blurb and put in different categories and maybe market it more as tough guy urban fantasy, if that's what it is.
Yeah, and I was like Lindsay makes a really good point, because my goal was, and this is Alex Newton's fault. Okay. Just kidding, Alex, if you listen. He was like, urban or fantasy romance was a genre that was doing well, and it didn't have a whole lot in it. So I was like, well, this character, the series I want to write about, this could potentially be a good, strong fantasy romance. But I neglected to recognize the fact that I don't write romance unless it's the main point of the story. And so, I mean, I've just finished the 5th book or whatever, and there's 2 books in the series where the chick is only in it for like 1 scene, and that is not a fantasy romance. And so, like when Lindsay gave that feedback, I was like, it's like I don't write fantasy romance, and this was my series that I got to learn. I don't write fantasy romance. In the series, it doesn't have the romance in it that the genre, I mean, that the blurb says it does. The first book, the first half of the first book does. But so I was like, okay, so I'll just rewrite that blurb and make it more about what the book really is about, which is this tough guy who is, fighting demons and trying to conquer the whole world, right? And trying to get the devil off his back, basically, which is pretty common in tough guy urban fantasy. And so yeah, so I was very appreciative of that feedback, and it didn't make me go like some feedback where you're like, oh my gosh.
Please just rewrite the whole series, Andrea. That's not what you want to hear.
Now that I forked over like $2,500 for the first book in audio, let's just rewrite the whole thing. Anyway, so I've been working on a description today. I'll test that out. But in the meantime, over the last week or so, I've been in an attempt to see if I could get that series to sell, the first book to sell. I ran a bunch of tests on Facebook ads. And the first set of ads was basically a test on descriptions. I have 2 descriptions that I wrote for it from the very beginning. One was in first person and one was in third person. And I had those running at the same time. They performed equally well, 21 cents per click, same number of clicks, same number of downloads, same number of impressions, same number of days running, etc. And since they were fairly equal, I decided not to make any changes. Of course, now I'm going to be making changes for sure. The current test I'm running is to find out which ad I should run long term. And my goal with this, I always have an ad running to the first in every series, just as a gentle pick me up all the time. And so I have 3 ads currently running, one with reader quotes at it on the beginning of it. And there's like, you got the little 5 gold stars. I just picked out really, really brief quotes, like very compelling. I don't remember what the rest of them are. Anyway, listeners, you guys just go through your 5-star reviews and pick out really, really brief, short, happy, excited quotes and use that. And then, so that's one with quotes, one with the first 3 chapters, and one with quotes followed by the first 3 chapters. Because the biggest thing that I've recognized with this series is that if I can get people reading, if they start that first paragraph, they keep reading. And so the one with quotes and sample chapters is okay. So the one with quotes actually is doing the worst. It's at 25 cents per click. I think that's actually dropped down to 20 cents per click. The one with quotes and sample chapters is doing the next worst, and that's at about 18 cents per click. And then the one that starts right at the beginning of the book without anything else is at about 10 cents per click right now. And the audience I'm targeting is the one I usually target. So urban fantasy readers, male and female, age 35 plus. It's about 720,000. I don't know numbers. I can't read. 720,000 big. I don't know yet which ad is going to give me the best results where downloads are concerned. They're all giving me downloads currently, which I like, but it's too soon to tell. So it might not end up being that the cheapest ad is the one I use, because if they don't go and download after clicking, then it doesn't make a difference. And then of course, once I rewrite the description, that's going to make a difference as well. Anyway, so if I can't get the series to sell, I'm going to see what I can do to tie it off with just one more book. Nolan and I were discussing the possibility of putting it on the back burner for a little while, so it can weather a bit, gain more reviews, and just be out while I focus on building my newsletter list still and brainstorm and research for my next series. I don't know how happy I can be doing that, because I've never done that before. I don't have the ability to jump from series to series very well. It makes it too hard for me to come back. And so I don't know. We'll see what I do. But one last point before I hand things off to Joe. And I was just telling Lindsay and Joe this before we started recording. I'm at the point now where I need books to sell almost more than anything else. I've written almost all my passion projects. I've got tons of ideas for future books, but honestly, they're all weighed equally in my mind. And if I can't get something to sell, And if I know ahead of time it's not going to sell, I don't have the time to write those kinds of books because yeah, like I, raising kids, homeschooling and all of that, I would rather write something that's going to sell. And so Midnight Chronicles is a passion project. But sometimes passion projects are like the worst thing we can do where royalties are concerned. And when you're first starting out, those passion projects, you got to get them out. Like you can't not write them. But when you're like where I am, or authors who have like lots of titles, you got to do what's best for the business as well as what's best for you. And if I can be passionate about other projects as well that will sell, that's what I'm going to focus my time on anyway. And I'll keep everybody updated as I go along.
Right. Well, that's definitely like a laudable goal. Like that's something. If you can develop the aptitude to like identify the thing that will sell well that you're also interested in writing, that's basically the entire point of like that's all of the advice we ever give on this show. So good luck to you, and I hope you do good.
If I crack it, I'll let everyone know.
Excellent.
and then that genre will get ruined.
As for me, I don't have a whole lot. I've been writing Big Sigma 6, and after having multiple months of very bad writing, I've been extremely consistent with 3,000 words a day on days that I write. I've also been very consistent on taking days off to do admin stuff because I've been getting almost no admin stuff done on the days that I write. So it's been a bit of a restructure, and it's been working okay. I'm 60,000 words into Big Sigma 6, and I've got a month and a half before it needs to get to the editor. So I should comfortably reach the end unless it grows out of control, which has happened before. But we'll hope that that doesn't happen. I also said last week that I would have the blurb and pre-order for Free Range 6 finished by the time we aired, which is today, and I don't. I didn't even try. I decided I was just going to focus on writing because I was sort of in a groove. So I'll do that at some point. I'm not going to promise it for next week, though. At this point, the edit's going to be back tomorrow. And traditionally, I haven't done a blurb and a pre-order until I've had the fully edited manuscript back. So maybe I'll just do what I've always done as opposed to trying to get ahead of the curve. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. Just soldiering along, getting things done. And hopefully I will have Big Sigma 6 in the hopper. And I was just, before we started recording, I was talking about how I'm sort of planning a little bit of time off after Big Sigma 6, assuming that I get it comfortably in under the deadline. I'm probably going to take a week or so to first off decide what I'm going to do next, because I don't have my next novel project selected yet. And also, as is sort of evidenced by my surroundings, which have been commented on, I have been letting a lot of other life-related things slide as I've been getting my books back in order. So I'm going to try to take some time to deal with that. And like the blurb and the pre-order, I will probably fail at doing those things. But, I mean well. So that's the news I got for this week.
Time off. That's a novel idea. And as I was telling Joe before we started recording, I've been like working like crazy to get, I just finished my Star Kingdom Book 8 edits, and I'm about to send it off to my beta reader. It ended up at 148,000 words, and pretty big story, tying everything up. This is the end of the series. And I was like, I can take time off now. Then I was like, no, I promised I'd do the bonus story to go with that. And I have to do a bonus scene for the other series and then get rolling on the next urban fantasy. I will take some days off in there. It's not my strength, but the COVID times, man, has got me like, well, what would I do? I'm just going to hang out and read, I guess, for a couple of days. But in the past, I've done more road trips and stuff for vacations and hiking trips. But yep, that's probably not going to do that quite right now. One thing I wanted to share with you guys before we jump into our checklist. Oh, I should mention too that Andrew was talking about you kind of have to, especially when you depend on this income, you have to pick and choose a little bit. Like just because you don't write to market doesn't mean you're not going to think of the business side, and that's certainly been my case the last few years. Sometimes I pick things that I know might not make as much money, but I just want to write like a new sci-fi story. But this year I was kind of like, well, I have the idea for a new sci-fi series in 2021, so maybe I'll do that. And I think I even talked about it on the show, sci-fi next year. But then I was thinking, well, my epic fantasy, high fantasy kind of stuff actually makes more and more reliably has in the past. So could I take the same ideas I had for the sci-fi and put them in the epic fantasy framework? Because space opera and epic fantasy are actually kind of can have some similarities. So at first I thought, nah, I don't want to do that. But I don't know about you guys, but sometimes you just kind of get some idea in your head and think about it, and maybe listen to some podcasts that I was listening to. David Farland, he's got I think I'd mentioned him last time, the $1 Million Outline, and just some books on for writers. And I listened to a couple interviews with him, and I just started thinking, okay, now I'm getting more excited about writing this kind of bigger story, kind of epic fantasy story. So that's my plan. So I do the same thing, Andrea, to kind of decide, and if I am going to do a passion thing, it's usually like a one novel. Like I have a sci-fi semi kind of romance with an autistic captain heroine. I was like, this is not going to sell. I'll do one novel. One novel's okay. But I wouldn't necessarily do a whole series on something that I thought was going to be a little harder to market. All right, and just FYI, for those who wrote in and said they want to hear more of Joe and that Andrea and I sound the same and do all the talking, he's going to be headlining next week's show on Patreon, so look forward to that. But Joe, actually, do you want to start us off today and talking a little bit, before we get into our checklist, which may be applicable to all who are planning a series, do you want to talk about kind of the road to six figures, what it was like for you, and then if Andrea wants to talk after that, and then I will come up with something to say, possibly intelligent, possibly not.
Okie dokie. I've told this story a couple times, and I'll start by saying that whenever anybody asks me for advice, just like in real life, like when I'm at a conference or a convention, I always preface it by saying I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you what I did and what I think should be done, because there's just everything is so incredibly situational. As will be seen, the short version of my road to six figures was as follows. I started publishing in 2010, which is right on the very earliest part of the Kindle wave. I think the Kindle was released in 2009 or 2008. So my first book, The Book of Deacon, was released without a professional edit and with a bad homemade cover. And it sold $19 worth in the first year. And I probably would have given up on that, except that I had actually written the first 3 books already. So I was at least going to publish the next 2. Once all 3 of them were out, and I had resigned to the fact that writing was just going to be a hobby, I made the first book free. As I mentioned before the show started, Brian S. Pratt, I believe, is the person who I had first read about doing that, and I decided to follow suit. And then by the end of that month, I had made about $2,000, and I reinvested the first $3,000 I made in new covers, and I reinvested after that in better editing. And I started my path towards six figures then. By the end of that year, I was in 5 figures, and by the end of the following year, I just missed 6 figures. Like, it technically was a 6-figure year if you started counting from like 3 days later, because my book release was on January, so I lost the end of January. So I only had 11 months sort of sliding window, and I kept it 6 figures for a couple of years, 3 or 4 years of 6 figures, and then another couple of years of very nearly 6 figures, like high 90,000 from the books. And mostly the momentum came from writing in a couple of different series. I had a relatively active Facebook presence, and I had a newsletter, and that was it in terms of how I was keeping sales going. I didn't really run ads. I had some really good luck early on with getting featured on BookBub. So like that was my only paid advertising besides boosted posts for new releases for most of the time that I was in 6 figures. Things slowed down for me recently, hence the restructuring I was talking about. But generally speaking, my path to 6 figures was a matter of good timing and having reasonably long books out in 3 different series. And so that I always had sort of a strong series going, pushing at least 2 books in a backlist. And that's my story.
And you're sticking to it.
I'm sticking to it.
It's so crazy because, like, My story in comparison, it's just, you know, it was mainly a story of me being in the wrong place in the wrong time. So like wrong genre at the wrong time. I mean, I hopped on the very beginning of 2011 and with a middle grade at fantasy series, epic fantasy series that just, I mean, it did not do super well. I mean, it did okay, but it did honestly better. The ebooks were doing better than all of the contemporary traditionally published books at that time. And I was only making like 500 a month on it. So that just shows how bad ebooks were doing for middle grade back then. Um, anyway, so my story is basically climbing my way to the top. I wrote my middle grade fantasies, a couple of romances, and a bunch of short stories and novellas before I decided to focus more on advertising and reader feedback. So I put a lot of conscious effort into my Mosaic Chronicles, and I took care to follow reader expectations better where like length and tropes and genre were concerned. I still didn't completely understand what tropes were. And back then tropes were like bad. Like everybody's like, don't write tropes, don't write cliches. You got to be completely original. That was like really bad feedback and really bad advice because I mean, I wanted to write my exciting little happy passion projects, but I also wanted to make money and readers just expect things. I think a lot of us know that. Anyway, so my Mosaic Chronicles is still not written to market. It's too much of a mix of fantasy subgenres for that. And things didn't exactly explode, but little by little, my royalties inched their way up with every release in that series. The thing that pushed me over into six figures was a BookBub promotion, which unfortunately isn't something that can be easily replicated. But other aspects of what I did can. So I tested things out with different promotional websites. I ran Facebook ads and to like figure out if my covers were working, my descriptions were working, my titles, even my series names. I focused on building my newsletter list and learning marketing. That first BookBub promotion, I think I had like 10,000 people subscribed to my newsletter list after that. And so, I mean, that kept things going. And then yeah, just making sure that I truly understood marketing. And of course, you can't ever really understand marketing because once you do, it changes. But the past year and a half has been difficult for me where royalties are concerned. And not surprisingly, my baby is like a year and a half old. So we can blame it all on him. He's almost not a baby anymore. He can't talk yet. So, but anyway, as I've said in the past, it doesn't matter. I'm determined to keep writing since it's how I stay happiest and success will follow once I get things moving again.
All right, for myself, I think we all here started a while back. I published my first novel, The Emperor's Edge, right before Christmas 2010, which is, of course, the best time, I'm sure, to launch a book. But I didn't have any followers, so it didn't matter anybody. Nobody bought it. I mean, maybe I sold a couple here and there. I remember trying, Goodreads had pay-per-click ads you could buy, and I tried that, and they worked horribly. But I sold a couple books that way. I was selling it at $2.99. And I had a second book, but not in the same series, because when I was looking at agents and what they wanted, they were like, well, don't bother writing a series until you know somebody's going to get the first one. So they were unrelated, but I published that. And very few sales in the beginning. There were not really cover designers back then, working for indies. You had to go hunting around in DeviantArt. And so I basically had horrible covers until like probably Balance on the Blade's Edge. 2013, I think I published that. Was probably my first, like, really, I thought it was a pretty good cover. And it actually, it was my first time sticking on Amazon and like the top, I mean, not way at the top, but like around 1,500 overall in the store. And I remember thinking, wow, this is doing really good, because I never had that experience with my first series. But the reason I'm telling you about it is because I did get to over making 100,000 a year with that first series. And it was very much, just kind of clawing along, trying to get sales. I think everybody talks about the Kindle Gold Rush, but you had to have the good covers. You had to really accidentally or just be talented and know. And it was a learning experience for me, and I'm not a design person. And I didn't really get that. Like, I remember when Joe's covers were out, his Book of Deacon first cover, his always be higher than my Emperor's Edge in the like the top 100 free. And because I had these weird yellow covers that somebody was like, I think they're books about historical India, right? And I was like, okay, I don't know. Because I did have a cover designer by that eventually, but he didn't really know either about, booking covers to market, I guess you would call it. So it was very much, the first thing I did that started selling books was I had a short story that I had originally written for an anthology that didn't get accepted, but it had the same heroine as from the series. And they had some fun banter. It was a complete story. I thought this would be pretty good. Maybe I can get people into it. And I didn't know how to make it free on Amazon at the time, but I knew that if I made it free on Smashwords and distributed it to Barnes & Noble, that it would be free there. So my first sales really came from Barnes & Noble because I put that out there. I had a better cover on that one. I had an artist draw the main character. Never mind that she was almost naked, kneeling on the ice. The artist was not from America, and we had some language problems in the communications. I did not have a lot of money starting out, guys. I remember I paid $200 for my first edit. It was like horrible. The guy was a teacher. I don't know where he was teaching, but anyway, I couldn't use it. And so I had all the problems starting out of not having much money to spend too. So anyway, but that short story, making it free, and I put a little excerpt of the book in the back of it, made the short story free. And this is what I still tell people to do this. This is what, it still works. And I put having the free story just up on the sites instead of like trying to do there weren't these services where you could put it up and people had to give your email address in order to get the short story. I just put it out free where people were. And later when I figured out how to make it price match on Amazon, I eventually, by the time I put my third book in my Emperor's Edge series, I was able to make the first one free there. And that certainly helped get the momentum going. I went from like a couple $100 a month, which I was getting basically because of that short story, to a couple $1,000s a month. And that's when I was like, okay, I see the potential here. This series could possibly get me to replace my day job income eventually. I did have a mailing list early on. I had come from kind of blogging and internet marketing a little bit, which you think would have given me tips on publishing and online marketing, but it was really kind of a different type of marketing. But so I had a mailing list, got that early on. And for many, many years, I just said, hey, if you want to know when I have new books out, you could sign up for my mailing list. And that was it. And, I think I got to like 7,000 subscribers over time that way. But it worked much better later on when I started, here's the free prequel novella that you can't get anywhere else. That helped much more to build a list faster. But it was about the fifth book in that series. It was really just gradually, I wasn't, publishing as quickly back then. I didn't write as quickly. I think I might have gotten 3 novels out a year, those first 3 or 4 years. And I did a series of novellas on the side just so I could have something else to like release in between, because it was about 6 months, 5-6 months between books. But by the time I got to the fifth one, I remember I made over 10,000 that month. And I was like, wow, this is more than I ever made in my day job. This is great. If I could just keep this up, this would be great. And by the time I put the 6th and 7th books out in that series, they were supposed to be one book, but I broke it up because it was like 230,000 words. So I had 2 novels to release, and that I think that got up to like 17,000 that month, or a couple months there. And anyway, that led to the first $100,000 year, and I have never fallen below that. It was the year after that was 100,000, and I made it up to 200,000 when I started doing what became the Dragonblood series. And I would say I made it that far without really any huge lucky breaks. It was just sort of being willing to always give away something free. That's why I'm such a proponent of that. And if other people don't have to do it, fine. I had horrible covers. I needed something to get people to try the story. I didn't know how to write to market. I was very kind of not steampunk, not epic fantasy, somewhere in the middle. I will call it high fantasy, but that's not a category on Amazon. So I've always been like willing to give stuff away for free just to get people to try the story. And I just gradually built up the fan base that way. And fortunately, people were really into the story, into the characters especially. I got a lot of fan art with that series, fan fiction. At one point, somebody even started a forum online, and then I was worried though when I got to the end of it. I even wrote one more. The series was done, I was like, I better write one more because I don't know if anything else I write is going to sell this well. And I did. That was a big, it did well. But none of these books, I should say, I got to this income. I was never like, it was very much release a book on Amazon, everybody goes out and buys it, get kind of a spike, in the sales ranking, and then it just trickles down and falls down that. So it was very much gathering fans one by one and just selling them the books. And I think you can still do that today. I feel like you have to do that today if you don't have a lot of money to spend on advertising. You have to be just willing to kind of grab a fan one at a time, little things that you can do. And we'll talk about that a little more coming up. But I will say you tend to have, or in my experiences, you have big jumps. Like I went from 3,000 a month to 10,000 based on a release. And when I went from 100 2 years to 200. And then when my Dragonblood series, when I boxed up that first box set of 3, made it 99 cents, that really took off. That was the first thing I'd ever had stick in like the top 200 on Amazon, and it stuck there for a long time. And that year I made 700,000. And then after that, I did the next series in Kindle Unlimited, and I made more. So that's why I'm still launching things in Kindle Unlimited today. And I've managed to stay up at that level. So I'm pleased. I'm always expecting the worst. I think I've talked about being glass half empty on this podcast. So I don't buy anything. I don't like take on any debt or anything. I'm just like, nope, buy a house when I can afford it. So that's been my attitude. And I still believe, and we're going to talk about this, that ads are great. You don't need them. You can, small sponsorship kind of sites can actually start to get you a fan base, especially if you're willing to do the free thing. If you have a story that people are into, that's kind of the thing that we'll talk a little bit about that too. Do you guys have any comments before? I guess we had a few general thoughts on what it takes. Do you want me to just jump into that, guys? Yes, maybe nodding. So I've mentioned this before, so I won't go into it too deeply, but as far as like how many books you have to be selling, Alex Newton has a chart in K-Lytics where he shows like what sales ranking and what price it takes for a book to make over 100,000, or 2 books or 3 books. And, he's got a bunch of them. And for 1 book at 99 cents, you'd have to be in the top 50 in the Amazon store for the entire year to make 118,000. For 1 book at $2.99, you'd have to be in the top 500 all year to make 129,000. And realistically, it's probably going to take a series selling quite, pretty well, or a new series and a backlist. In any given year, my backlist is at least half of my income. So I'm going to ignore using my urban fantasy or sci-fi series as an example, because I'm spending money on Amazon ads for those, and I know not everybody's going to have the money to go throw money at that right now, especially if you're starting out or not making a lot yet. But I talked about last time that my Dragonblood series that is basically been wrapped up for 5 years, except for one random extra book I did in 2018. And I mentioned that should make about 100,000 this year. And the only advertising I've done this year has been like a $200 boosted Facebook post where I promoted all of my free series starters. And I do have the three book boxed set for free in that series. So the income is coming from the other 5 books basically. And I'm not saying like I never advertised this series, but it's never been a lot. It's always been wide. I never did AMS ads or Facebook ads on it. Is more, other than the boosted posts, it's more doing like free Booksy, e-reader News Today. It has had BookBubs over the years, and it's done well with it. I do all these things for all my series. Some of them perform better than others. This one's kind of been my star. But I've done like multi-author box sets with the book one. So I've done a lot of things, but this is a series that in 7 years, it's been about $10,000 spent lifetime on sponsored posts, basically. And the covers were about $200 each on these. So I look at what I'm spending now on covers for my urban fantasy. And it's like, my best-selling series was actually just Photoshop manipulation stuff. But as far as what it takes, like the books are just ranking around 20, 30,000 overall on Amazon right now. They're not in KU. They're $3.99 or $4.99 for the later ones that are longer. The first 3 are free. They do sell also on the other stores, so that's some of the income. But I just wanted to get out of your head, hopefully, that you need to be like in the top 500 in Amazon to be really successful as an author. If you see people that are up there and they're up there for a while, they're probably making multi-6 figures. And there are certainly authors making 7 figures out there, even after expenses. So it is possible. All right, Joe, why don't you talk for a little bit? I will have a drink.
Sure. I'm going to say that I have never been a rapid releaser. I've actually, one of my 6-figure years didn't have a book release in it. I had an entire gap, a 1-year gap in my release process. And mostly my success during the time that I was making my most money came from very strong sell-through on series, 3 series each that had a free series starter. So the Book of Deacon stuck in the book 1 of the Book of Deacon stuck in the top 100 free books for a long time. I was really impressed. And part of that was because I had gotten multiple book bubs over the years with it. And part of it was because I was an early book that had a decent cover, and therefore ended up getting thousands of reviews once it went free. Plus, I was probably in the top 20 fantasy free books even longer than I was in the top 100 free books overall. Um, and back then, free and paid were side by side. Like the top 20 paid books and the top 20 free books in a genre were side by side. So I was like right up there next to the Game of Thrones, just because of how the layout was. That's not the case anymore. So that got me a tremendous amount of traffic to book one, which kept books 2 and 3 close to each other in the ranks. And I kept each series afloat with about 1 new entry per year and about 2 BookBub features somewhere on my other series per year. So again, I had a lot of luck with BookBub. Through all that time, I was wide. I have only one series that has been Kindle Unlimited, and it's honestly, series-wise, probably my worst performer, but we've been through that. I had some particularly good runs on Barnes & Noble and on Apple. At any given time, I usually had about one series being buoyed by a recent release, and like I said, another one being held up by a BookBub. But all this is saying, like, most of my money has been made on books that were between 5 and 10,000 in the ranks on Amazon. If you have a couple of books between 5 and 10,000, you're making a good living. At least back when I was keeping track of that sort of thing. I really never shot for a big release. Even when I was like, even after a year of not having a book out, I didn't really focus on gigantic launches. I just tried to make sure there was traffic going to my early books. And also, through most of the time I was making my most money, my books were sort of underpriced. 150,000 words, I was charging $2.99, like the minimum you can get full royalty for. A lot of the keys to my early success are pretty tightly linked to catching the Kindle wave early, but most of my long-term earnings came from just keeping momentum up with periodic promos and just, strong read through.
My kids are like running around in the background. So I'm like, okay, guys, hope you're going to be quiet while I'm talking here. Okay. So I used to always say that people who didn't give up eventually would find success. And that's mostly still true, but I don't know. Like, I don't know that I totally agree with that or believe that anymore. So, because people who never give up and consistently do the wrong things most likely won't ever be successful. Or if they do, it'll be very short-lived, like a couple of months, which is kind of like what Lindsay's saying. If you're like putting 90% of your royalties into ads, that's not going to last very long. And if you're doing things not right, or if you're, pushing the boulder uphill, it's just not going to last for very long. And wrong things, I'm like, when I'm talking about wrong things, I don't know, like publishing poetry. And that's not wrong if you love poetry, but if you want to make 100,000 a year, it is wrong. What are other things that could be wrong? I should have actually put this into the list before I started talking. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no spoilers for the checklist. Hey, we're going to get to that.
Oh, good point. So, anyway, okay, so the most important thing is to work smart and hard. You can't become successful if you're not willing to put in hard work, but you also can't become successful if you're not willing to put in smart work. And so that was something my dad always told us. You got to work smarter, not harder. Well, you have to do both. The vast majority of authors need to learn how to market. I definitely did. My books alone weren't bringing in serious money. I had to learn to be smart about marketing. So building my newsletter list and understanding how to help readers, recognize that I'm a person, and I like that interaction. It's really hard now because I don't have the time anymore. But in the beginning, I really focused on building relationships, and I have some very dedicated readers because of that. And so that really, really helped. Anyway, so I'm lucky in that I love this aspect of being an author, marketing and all that, but I had to learn what made it tick. And once I had a taste for what good marketing felt like, I got a bug that hasn't left since. And so, I mean, if you're marketing and never seeing results, that's really discouraging. And I can understand why people just don't want to market ever again. Anyway, so the biggest thing I tell clients is not to plan their lives around one specific tactic, especially if it's something they can't control, like BookBub features. But I tell them to teach themselves several ways to bring in money. So writing in good genres, advertising on at least one of the good spots. So like, master Facebook ads or master Amazon ads or master BookBub ads, just to keep things running to your book. And it doesn't need to be big. Like my ads are only $5 a day, except one's at $7 a day. Running regular promotions with websites, things like that. Those are good ways, especially in between releases, to become successful and to keep your books up in the ranks.
All right, well, let's jump into our checklist. So yeah, people have had to listen to us talk for 45 minutes. They're like, we just want the checklist, come on. So hopefully this will be useful. I'm going to start with the quote, which I don't know who said this. I think Einstein gets attributed to it, but it's just the insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. So if what you're doing is not working, it's trying to change things up. If you want to make more money, and some people keep publishing and just want to have their books out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not saying you have to write to market, but we'll talk about going forward here with our checklist that it's just maybe try something else. Maybe it's time. But just kind of a word to you on mindset. I keep hearing this over and over again that it's pay to play right now and you don't have a shot if you don't have piles of money to spend on ads. I will agree that it's going to be hard to get into a competitive category's top 100s and stick, especially without ads. But like we were talking about with the numbers, you do not need to do that to have a very solid career. I'm going to make 100,000 on that series this year with books that are in the 20, 30,000 on Amazon, and they sell, like 10 copies each on the other sites, each book, maybe 20, if, on a good day. But just realize that all ads do is get you some visibility on your first book. And that's only part of the battle. At the most, they get you a sale on book one. No amount of advertising is going to get people to buy the rest of your series if they don't like book one. So if you see somebody in your category and they're killing it, with book one and you see the ads all over the place, you're like, yeah, that's why they're doing well. But you also see that their books 2, 3, 4, and 5, etc., are also ranking in that top 100. I promise they're doing a lot more than just having money to throw at ads. Joe, did you want to jump in before I move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree. Ads get strangers to buy your books, but your books make those strangers into fans, and the fans are what give you a career. It's nearly impossible to buy your way to success. The return on investment on a single book with crazy amounts of ads is super hard to manage. So most people making a go at it are at least able to capture the interest of the people with the book they are advertising. So yeah, it's not pay to play. There's got to be skill involved, or you're just not going to make it.
I want to bold that and quote it. So that was much better than my Einstein quote. Ads get strangers to buy your books, but books make those strangers into fans, and your fans give you a career. Joe Lalo doing a quotable quote.
That was a really good memory, Lindsay. Did you read that off of something?
It's like he put his notes down or something in our document. I don't know. I can't even remember what I said. But moving on, I just want to lightly touch on this because you've all heard it 1,000 times before. But the cover, the blurb, and your first 20 pages, the sample pages, if the writing isn't clean and engaging, if the character isn't immediately someone you want to read about, if the cover doesn't immediately tell your target audience that this book is for them, it's an uphill battle. And that's why I really relied on my story with my first series, because my covers were like historical India, apparently, is what they were telling the readers the books would be. So it's almost better if you had to claw your way up because you had sucky covers. It's like then you had to rely on the story was the only thing, and then the marketing gets easier when you figure that part out. But now there's so many resources out. Like we didn't have podcasts when we got started. I think Joanna had the creative pen, but I don't think she was talking about like, guys, these are the covers you need to do to rock sales in your category. So Joe, did you want to mention your thoughts on covers? You actually did covers, right? I told you guys I was always so envious of him up there in that top 100 above me with his awesome covers.
But I didn't start with awesome covers. Like I said earlier in the show, my first covers were homemade and terrible. I think I have a post on my website showing what my original covers looked like. And I'll just say that when I changed to the covers that are currently on my books, my sales tripled. And that was like during the time that my sales were starting to pick up. Like I made $3,000. I put new covers on, and then my sales tripled. So covers make a huge difference, to the point where, also worth saying, my blurbs for those first books are very much summaries, which are not great blurbs. So the covers basically were doing all of the heavy lifting in terms of getting eyes on, getting people to pick up my books.
All right, so the next thing on my list here is your book or series, is it too niche? You don't have to write to market, but if you're writing genre fiction and you want it to sell, it has to have some commercial appeal. Sometimes a small niche can work if it's underserved and there's a hungry audience. Like I stumbled across someone doing really well a couple years ago with gay high fantasy romance. But sometimes a niche is small for a reason, because there's not really an audience. There's not many people that really want that. One of my poorest performing pen name titles was a time travel futuristic dystopian romance. I think you would call it cli-fi, climate destruction fiction. It's like a thing in sci-fi, but not with romance and not with time travel. And it was, it actually had a really cool cover. I did like a contest, to get the cover, but it still didn't really sell beyond my core readers. And the problem was dystopian romance it's always going to be tough, as I know now, because you've got kind of two opposing audiences that you need to come together. You've got the people who want romance, they want a happily ever after, usually, reading it as escape fiction because the world sucks right now, or just because they enjoy those kinds of happily ever after stories. Whereas dystopian future is the people who want like end of the world, man. They want to see how tough they pretending they're the character, and they're going to be the guy that's saving the world when the zombies come. So it's really, I learned from watching the charts when I was doing that one, that going back to, if you're going to do time travel, you need to go back to historical periods that are romanticized, that are appealing and exotic, and especially if you're adding the romance, that romance readers, they like their Highlanders, they like the Vikings, these exotic periods that people want to go to. So if you're in a niche that's really small, maybe it's time to try something, possibly with broader appeal. Go ahead, Joe.
Right. This is the part where I talk about the books I've released that really stretch the meaning of the word niche, because I wrote a superhero satire and I wrote the Pizza Dragon book, which there's got to be a drinking game at this point for whenever I mention Pizza Dragon. I'm glad I wrote them, but I had no real expectations of breakaway hits for either of those books. If your book isn't doing well and it's not solidly well known, it's not a solidly well known market. It maybe do some research into the potential audience. Like you should have done that before you wrote it, if your goal was to be a big earner. But if you feel your book is good, and you don't think it's living up to potential, look into what potential audience you have, search around, find some forums and communities for the subgenre. And if you can't find forums and communities for the subgenre, then you're never going to do well with that book, because the audience doesn't exist. And I should also say, if you do find the community, don't just show up and say, buy my book, because that's a bad look. It's just, you're trying to educate yourself on the audience, not annoy them.
My favorite thing as an admin of, Facebook groups is when people say, yes, I will not promote my stuff. And the very first thing they post is a self-promotion. I don't think our listeners are going to have problems with that. Our listeners are pretty smart. They're not the spammers out there. Something to keep in mind is you're writing in a genre that has a hungry readership in a way. Okay, sorry. And by the way, the reason I wasn't talking earlier is because I didn't put thoughts down. So I didn't want, because like Lindsay's like, hey, Joe, your turn. And I'm like, I don't want the listeners to be like, why is she skipping Andrea? But okay, so something, like I was saying, something to keep in mind is, are you writing in a genre that has a hungry readership in a way that readers want the stories? So as an example, when I first started out, my most successful book was a teen romance. It was a novella, and it made pennies compared to how my author friends did with their full-length teen romances. So even though it was doing really well compared to my middle grade fantasies and my short stories and things like that, it just wasn't doing as well as it could have. So there are several things that readers are looking for, and I do recommend you download K-Lytics reports. So those include length, price, description, cover, etc. And your goal is to get as close as possible to what readers are expecting, but without, like Lindsay, like we've all said, you don't have to write to market to be successful. None of us are really absolutely fantastic at writing to market. Joe might be, actually, but his epic fantasies, he's shaking his head. But Yeah, like, I mean, the closer you can get, especially as the market gets more crowded, the better it is. And as long as if you can string in your passion into that, then things will just be easier for you in the long run.
All right, and that kind of leads us into the next thing on the checklist is, and a lot of us do this without realizing it. It's basically not writing a story that meshes with the wants of the audience you think you're writing for. You know, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning. If you're doing a romance, you probably want it from the heroine's point of view. Another example is I've seen, you know, I do a lot of sci-fi. I've seen female sci-fi authors start male pen names because sci-fi is kind of dominated by male readers and they want a fair shake. But then, you know, I saw one person do this. They started a male pen name and then they published a sci-fi story. They kind of focused on the, you know, I just vaguely remember from the blurb, but it was like a mom and a son in their relationship. And I was like, man, no guy is going to pick that up. Not no guy, but you know, most guys are not looking for that. They're looking for the action adventure in the sci-fi setting. So if you are gonna, you know, start a pen name to appeal to the opposite sex, you need to make sure you do the hero or the heroine of the story are also designed to appeal to the opposite sex. Like a guy writing romance needs to put a heroine on page one and promise a love story. A woman writing sci-fi targeting guys needs to put a guy on page one and promise tons of action and adventure. I have written a sci-fi story, an 8-book series about a mom looking for her daughter, and it did great, but I wrote it as a woman writing for women. You know, I had a romance within the action adventure stuff, and I targeted female sci-fi readers with my ads. I certainly got male readers, but only the kind of guys that are cool with reading a story from a woman's point of view. And we've seen, you know, I wish I could find the original study that does that, but I've seen, you know, I see it from my gut, and I've seen studies in the past. Guys are less likely to be willing to read a story with a female protagonist. Women will be more likely to try a male protagonist, but it does seem that we just kind of identify more easily with whatever we are. So do you guys have any thoughts on that before I move on to the next one that I shoved in at the last minute?
I will say that first off, surprisingly, my 3 most successful series, 2 of them have female protagonists. Well, one of them's an ensemble cast, but so you can sell reasonably well, even if you are writing contrary to your gender. But you definitely need to know what the audience is looking for, because I routinely made the mistake of looking at a genre and seeing the parts of that genre that are interesting to me, which is a great way to write a book that you're interested in. But you really also need to keep in mind what the audience is interested in, since they're the ones who are going to be buying it. So I have missed the genre tropes pretty hard in some of my books, and sometimes it didn't matter, people still like them, and other times they didn't pick it up because I just didn't come close enough to what they were expecting.
And I hope our listeners are catching a theme here. Like, a lot of being successful does not have to do with marketing. You need to be smart where marketing is concerned, but your craft, you know, your story has to be what sells the book. And so if you're, you know, fighting really hard and marketing as hard as you can and nothing is happening, and you know your cover is good, you know your description's good. Yeah, anyway.
Right, and it's not, we're not saying like you're not writing fantastic stories too. You just maybe not thinking about maybe who the target audience is, because you just, especially we all do this with our first book, our first series, we just write it what we like. Then later you find out that you're not really that representative of the common person. Something about the very fact that you became a writer means you're probably a little weird. Sorry, guys. We're weird. It's true.
And some of us are even making those mistakes with the current series they're writing. I'm not going to name names, though.
Well, I made mistakes with my Star Kingdom series. Well, I still wouldn't even know how to fix it now. It's very much like Big Bang Theory in space. So it's not your typical Han Solo, you know, Mal Reynolds kind of action hero. The guy is a professor of robotics who has seizures is the main character. So people look at the cover, they're like, oh, cool, military sci-fi, space opera. And then they read the blurb and they're like, sounds a little different than I expected from the cover. And so I don't know, the covers are still pretty good, so I'm keeping them. But, you know, so sometimes you look back in retrospect, and if it worked good enough, you know, the fans that have read that love it. You know, they've really gotten into it. And that's sort of a theme you'll see with me, is that if I can get people to read this story, I get a lot of people that are really into the characters in the story. I'm still not the best at figuring out ahead of time what is exactly what the market wants. But next point on the list is just being, I'm going to say, if you're writing genre fiction, you don't really, and you want to make money, You don't want to do anything that is too literary or that's kind of out there stylistically. I saw somebody that had been doing this a long time, had several series out, a lot of books, hadn't managed to make much headway. And so I looked up their series, and I looked up like 3 of the book ones and the most in their series. And, you know, covers were good, blurbs were pretty okay. I'm so good with my praise. They were pretty okay, guys. And I did the look inside, and it's like first person present tense. I was just like, oh my gosh. You guys, I don't know who played like the Oregon Trail. You guys remember that game? Some of you, you had the option. You could be like the easy level. I think you was a banker. You could be the middle level. It's like the carpenter. You could be the hard level, was the farmer. And if you were the banker and you had all the money and it was the easiest, half your party was still going to die from dysentery on the way to the Oregon coast, because it's just, that's the game. But if you were the hardest level, all you got was like, here's your wagon and a box of bullets for hunting. See ya in Oregon. My point with that is that doing something like that, first person present tense in genre fiction, it's like picking the hard level. I would guess that 9 out of 10 readers are going to download the sample chapters and go like, nope, this is too weird. So even if the story is fantastic, even if it could win awards, it's going to take kind of a special reader to be willing to go with that. So I would, you know, I mean, you're never going to go wrong with third person past tense. Some genres, first person past tense is more common. You know, like when I switched to urban fantasy for my series this year, I usually read in third person. I downloaded several books in the top 100 because I kind of knew first person was pretty common, and it verified. I'm like, okay, first person. So I decided, well, I'm going to go with it. It's not my natural thing. And, you know, I found after I wrote a couple chapters, it was fine. And it made me a little more conscious of varying up the sentence a little bit and not having I all the time. But my point is just look at the genre you're in, what's in the top 100. There's very few, honestly, genre fiction series where you can find the first person's common. There aren't any where present tense is going to be common. Don't try second tense or the second person unless you're N.K. Jemisin and you're going to win a Hugo with that book. There are very few of those. So just be careful with that kind of thing. And I think if you want to experiment on one book, like I said, I've done the one-off books, fine, do something weird. But if you're planning to write a whole series, which is a really big investment of time, don't make it harder on yourself, especially like pick your battles. You know, I wouldn't mess with the tense that and the style, you know, POV limited, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You guys talk now. I have dogs roaming around in the back that are distracting me.
Yeah, I would say that you'd be surprised how often some relatively innocuous style choices will turn out to be a stumbling block for readers. I'm a big fan of having characters who have unique speech patterns and dialects, but I've read some books that really taught me not to do what they did, because they have had, like, I read a book that had a fully phonetic Cockney or Scottish accent, and there were so many hyphens and apostrophes, it was like reading hieroglyphics. Like, it was hard to get through dialogue, and it was like a central character with important information about the story, and I had to really sit there and decipher what they were saying, and it made it difficult to get through. And I've also had books where the bulk of the sentences really stretched the line between standard and run-on sentence. Like, they went out of their way to put together a sentence that you would have to spend 2 minutes diagramming. And just carrying that much information in your head as a reader before you finally get to the verb of the sentence, it's just more work than the average reader might want to do. So, like, I'm not saying you need to write dumb. You absolutely don't need to do that. But if you were writing like incredibly purple prose that is super, you're reaching deep into the thesaurus for every line, you're going to fatigue a lot of readers. Some people will love it, but a lot of people will sort of be like, this is not how I wanted to spend my downtime, is looking up every third word. So yeah, you absolutely want to make the reading experience as easy and comfortable as possible.
And if you have characters who have accents, just things here and there to remind readers that they have an accent. It doesn't have to, I mean, I don't know, Hagrid and Harry Potter, I had the hardest time reading it, and I have seen people do worse accents than that. So like what Joe was saying. So if you do have characters who have strong accents, just throw in reminders here and there. And that's, fine. And then just a quick note about first person, first tense. Like that is, I mean, dystopian, Hunger Games, Divergent are both in first person, first tense, but those authors have a team
Present
of
tense.
First person, what did I say?
First tense. I was like, readers are gonna be like, wait, what is that?
First tense, present author. Anyway, so I mean, they have a huge team of editors behind them, and I mean, there's other books that are in dystopian, YA dystopian, like The Selection is in third person past tense. So not every book in dystopian is in first person first tense. And I'm going to say, for those of us who can only afford one editor or maybe two editors, but can't afford a whole team of editors, first person present tense is really hard to pull off in such a way that it doesn't feel like you're jabbing yourself in the eye with a pencil. So dystopian is an exception, but even not every dystopian book is in that. Lindsay, did you want to add something there?
I was just gonna say that you do see that more often in YA stuff,
Yeah.
but mostly traditional published. And
Yep.
they have different marketing arms and ways to get books out and build the buzz than we do. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and they also have, like I was saying, they have editors, lots of them in some cases. Sometimes they don't at all, but anyway, it's again fighting uphill. And so another thing to watch out for is Yoda-esque writing. People prefer straightforward over elaborate backward sentences, and Joe is kind of talking about that. I still find books that are so convoluted they're difficult to read. So like they'll say, with her best friend Danielle, Rachel loved eating pizza, instead of Rachel loved eating pizza with her best friend Danielle. If you're focusing too much on delivery instead of on telling a good story in a straightforward and natural way, you're going to lose readers.
All right, excellent point. Me, you eating pizza now, we're good. You're making me hungry. Next on the list is mining reviews for clues. We authors are often sensitive souls, and I'll be the first to say I don't look at my own reviews anymore, but I did in the past early on, and there can be hints in there. Sometimes your star average can be okay, and people will give you 4 or 5 stars, but if you're kind of skimming through them and you see a lot that are like, it took me a while to get into this, but then it was really good, or slow start, but I'm glad I stuck with it. As realize again that for every reader who will stick with something, 10 won't, and they just didn't leave a review. So you don't even realize that's something I've been working on in my writing career, is getting better at the pacing. Epic fantasy fans are a little more tolerant of very slowly unwinding stories, but like when I did the urban fantasy, I was very conscious of like not doing scenes or chapters more than 2 or like 3,000 words. I was like, ooh, this is getting too long. So pacing is something that a lot of the authors that you see that you think their stuff is junk, and you're like, man, they have like no skills at writing. Why is that a bestseller and my beautiful story is not? Usually they're pretty good at the pacing and just really getting readers sucked into the story and turning the pages.
Is it my turn now? Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. No, I'm really glad that Lindsay brought up reviews, because I don't know, I'm tired of hearing authors tell others never to read their reviews. Yes, it can be demoralizing. Yes, it can crush your soul and shred your heart and make you not want to write a book again for a very long time. But it is one of the best ways to learn how to be a stronger writer and to understand what readers are thinking. And that's kind of funny. Reading what readers thought is a great way to understand what readers thought. So like Lindsay said, watch for patterns. I recently read through a bunch of my 5-star reviews to see what positive things people were saying about my Midnight Chronicles for use in Facebook ads. And I learned that this series isn't like my others. It's compelling, intense, engaging, and heartrending. I knew it's heavier on emotions, but it strikes a different chord than my books usually do. And so for this reason, finding a different readership is necessary for this book's success. Reviews can totally help you learn if you're missing the target or if you've hit a completely different target than expected. And I don't usually tell my authors, my clients, to read their reviews unless I feel like they need to, I don't know, you see patterns even in 1-star reviews. And like what Lindsay was saying, you can get a 4-star review and they're going to say something negative about the book in that 4-star review. And if you notice patterns, I don't know, like have one day where you just read your reviews and you write down your thoughts, your impressions from those reviews, have some pizza and whatever you need to, hot chocolate, and then just sleep on it. And then the next day or the next week or whatever, pull up your big girl panties and do some work you need to do to write a book that readers want to read.
FYI, I recommend drinking wine while you read your reviews, not hot chocolate.
Oh, come on. Hot chocolate, my favorite beverage. Strawberry milk, too.
All
I'm
right,
still
just a
5.
couple more things on our list here. The another thing I would suggest is we usually suggest sticking to one genre because it's easier to build up an audience if you keep writing more of what they want. But that's kind of assuming you're actually making some headway in that genre. If you're not, maybe it's time to try something else. Like if you're really struggling to get your steampunk romance off the ground, but you also happen to be a big fan of romantic comedy, maybe go try a series of that. I've actually seen quite a few people who struggled to sell as much as they wanted, despite good reviews, despite solid stories. They were just kind of in a small niche, and they really broke out big time when they jumped into something bigger that has larger potential audience. Like if you're a good writer, you can make it in a bigger genre, especially taking all you've learned about marketing from this first series or couple series. That's why a lot of people start pen names. So, give it a shot if you're not getting the kind of success you want in the one you're working on.
And you can also go from like a overcrowded genre into a less crowded genre, and that's again, we really need to get some money from Alex. That's where K-Lytics come in handy. Seriously, his reports are very, very beneficial. But this is exactly what I'm doing right now. So I'm super passionate about contemporary fantasy, urban especially, but I don't have the ability to write fast enough for the urban fantasy market. So I'm looking into moving back to epic fantasy or another subgenre of fantasy, or even just moving completely to romance. We all have favorite genres, but being married to one and not being willing to try something else if our favorite isn't working isn't a smart business plan unless you're playing the really long game. Like, I'm going to be successful in 20 years or something. Keep in mind that just one book in a new genre won't be enough to see if it's a good place for you. You'll need to try out a few books before deciding if it'll be good. Also, do your research before switching. So, like I said earlier, moving into a hugely crowded genre sometimes isn't the best bet.
All right, last thing on the list, as we've been talking for over an hour, what's new, guys? Time and consistency. And I know this isn't romantic or sexy, but some of this is kind of like compounding interest. Over time, if you keep publishing new work, keep promoting like the book one or the older series, and people keep finding it and becoming fans who will buy everything you write, you get to the point where you can have good launches and you know a series isn't going to bomb, even if it isn't anywhere close to what the mass market wants. But we all want today, we want that first series to kill it and to be in the top 100 of our category on Amazon. And, like we kind of talked about in the beginning, especially with me, I was very slowly and gradually just kind of finding more people, bringing them into my book one, and getting to the point where a new release sold, I don't know how many they sold back then. I didn't look, 10,000 copies, let's say, at $4.99. And that's kind of what allowed me to get this solid income, is just always writing more stuff. I do write quickly now. I did not write as quickly in the beginning. I did not find that I had to write a book a month to get to 6 figures. Like I said, I think I've had 3 novels this first 3 or 4 years. That was after the first one took 7 years to finish. But gradually over time, you keep writing, and before you know it, you've got 50 books in your back catalog. And as I said, a lot of my income today comes from the backlist. So it's a lot easier all you do with the backlist stuff every now and then, run a free Booksy. I try for the BookBub. Sometimes I get them on the wide stuff, like never on the stuff that's in KU. But, you just keep trying every time, every month, and you can have decent promos. Even without the BookBubs, you can get some new readers in. Just every time you run one and get 1,000 downloads, maybe 2 of those people become super fans that buy everything. And if one person comes in and buys everything when you have 50 books, that's a big paycheck. That was worth it. That way more. One person paid for the free Booksy, So time and doing it consistency. Like, you don't have to do it every month, but there's a lot of power in putting a book out every quarter or 2 a year. And every January and August, there's a new book from this author, and your readers will get to know that and get to expect it and be ready to open their wallets to buy it. All right, you guys can finish up. And I think then we'll just save our listener questions for a shorter show, maybe the Patreon next week.
Right. Yeah, I'll say that particularly consistency is underrated in terms of how much it can contribute to your success. If you look at every major like social media or like YouTube, consistency can be profoundly important. As a consumer, I like when I can rely reliably get the media I'm expecting at the time I'm expecting it. I don't care if it's once a month or once a year or once a week. When I'm like, oh, that's right, it's time for, and then it's there, I'm excited. And the moment that it's not there, it is very noticeable to me. I again was not a fast writer by modern standards. I was basically putting out one book in each series per year for most of my career, but everybody knew that oh yeah, well, if the Free Range book just came out and he didn't do, he just did the sci-fi, now it's going to be fantasy, and people sort of expected their annual fix, and it's just once a year, and that's something that actually Patreon taught me. Speaking of Patreon, is that when you have something out regularly, it's almost like you're constantly advertising for it, because, oh, well, it comes out on the 27th of every month. So as people are looking at their, oh, it's almost time for the new book, like you're sort of in people's heads. So consistency, not even if it's not fast, consistency can really build a strong audience.
And if you can't write a book a month, which a lot of people can't, pick like 2 months a year, or pick 3 months a year, or 4 months a year where you always have a release. So like April and May. No, sorry, that's the next month. Oh my gosh, so tired. April, July, and December or something. I don't know. Just pick months where you always release a book. And that trains readers to be like, oh, this is the month where a new release comes out. And then I did have a couple of thoughts just on burnout. So make sure you have a plan to burn out. What are you going to do to prevent it? What will you do to get out of it? What will you do if you get it? How you keep your business running while you take a break? Are you willing to do what is necessary for your overall health and happiness, or are you going to force yourself to keep working? Because sometimes giving yourself permission to take a break will get you through burnout faster than working through it. And you need to also recognize what is causing your burnout in the first place. A lot of the time, burnout for me comes from personal stress and books not doing well. And so like the Midnight Chronicles not doing well, it's affected my desire to, and my excitement to write. And so if you need a little bit of success, then run a promotion, or, do something that will generate that success to get you excited, to get you back to writing again. And above all, recognize that burnout almost always leads to writing books that are below your usual quality. So give yourself permission to do what is necessary for a happier and healthier author. I feel like I'm like doing like some sort of an infomercial.
For only $9.99, Andrea can teach you how to become a happier and healthier author.
$9.99. Oh, selling me short, Lindsay.
Wait, no, $999. There you go.
$30,000 for a cruise with me.
At least put it in the Caribbean.
Yes.
All right, we'll do listener questions next week. So we are going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for listening, everyone. And thank you to Joshua Pearson for producing the show. You can find the show notes. This was episode 50. You can find the show notes at episode 50 at sixfigureauthors.com with the number 6. Or come say hi in the Facebook group. Just look us up, Six Figure Authors. You know the question you have to answer, or you'll find out. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
So long, everybody.